With the Western and Eastern fronts collapsing, the Nazi government was entering a phase of true desperation, which would lead to the declaration of total war and the formation of the so-called People's Storm, or as the Germans say, the Volkssturm. This panic move to recruit every able-bodied man from 16 to 60 that wasn't in the most essential jobs was Germany's last chance to hold back the Allied tide. But were they actually effective in combat? Well, let's break it down and take a look. Firstly, we need to break down the makeup of the Volkssturm. So on October 18th, 1944, by order of the Fuhrer Adolf Hitler, it would lead to the mobilisation of around 6 million civilians from the German population, with everyone from teenagers to old World War I veterans being scooped up and bundled together into fighting units. The hope being that the youth and vigour of the younger generation, with the combat experience of the older generation, would create a cohesive and fairly efficient unit that could hold the lines against professional armies. But given that the people they were recruiting was such a mix of ages and ableness, with many being too old or having health problems to be fit enough for the intense combat that war required, it was a major problem before the Volkssturm had even begun. The recruitment and command would fall under the SS, Nazi Germany's political military arm. This was so the fighting force was to be loyal to the party first, and because of this, recruitment was done by local party officials in each district. And the official levy system was as follows. First levy, 1.2 million men in 1,850 battalions, of which 400 were in frontier districts, all physically fit men between the ages of 20 to 60 without essential war work exemption, assigned to frontline battalions, quartered in military barracks and liable for service outside their home districts. Second levy, 2.8 million men in 4,860 battalions, of which 1,050 were in frontier districts, all physically fit men between the ages of 20 and 60 with essential war work exemption, quartered at home and liable for service in their home districts. Third levy, 600,000 16 to 19-year-olds, plus some 15-year-old volunteers, in approximately 1,040 battalions, mainly 16-year-old Hitler Youth trained, and they were in these so-called toughen up camps. And the fourth levy, which was 1.4 million men, between 20 and 60 years old, unfit for active service, plus volunteers over 60, in approximately 2,430 battalions for guard duty, including POW camps and concentration camps. Of the troops raised, only around a third saw frontline combat, and many slipped through the cracks to surrender to the Allies or hide, as many Germans had already lost faith in any type of victory. There was a massive use of propaganda to help with recruitment, with the Volkssturm being said to be a noble and proud role in the war, and talking of how they would be equipped with the best weapons and equipment from the SS's own armories to fight the invaders. This leads to the next major hurdle, the arming of these 6 million brave souls. With the German war machine struggling to keep its professional armies supplied, and even with the SS searching their private stores of weapons, it was a dire situation with very little available. To put this into perspective, the Volkssturm would require at least 300,000 rifles a month, but with the German industry running to the maximum capacity, they were told they would receive practically zero. This led to a mix and match of any weapons available, from old rifles before World War I, pistols, shotguns, even crossbows and muskets from museums in some cases, and they lacked any heavy weapons in most cases, very little heavy machine guns or anti-tank guns, or field artillery. It was so bad they even attempted to make their own weapons, and even buy some weapons off the Italian black market, but this was a total failure. Some of these contracts for their own made weapons went out. They were pretty simple, they were designed to be easy to create and easy to use, such as the Volks pistol, the MP3008, known as the People's Sten gun. It was basically a German copy of the Sten gun, but using the MP40 as a base. And the Gustloff Volkssturmgewehr, the People's Assault Rifle. Think of like an MP44, but far simplified. But most of these weapons were not created in large enough quantities, and they were mainly pretty much failures. They weren't reliable, they weren't effective. But there was one silver lining, the mighty Panzerfaust. With millions of these single-shot AT weapons available, the Volkssturm could at least be armed with a weapon capable of knocking out a tank with a single shot. Though with a maximum range of 60 metres, it was a near-suicide mission. It would require a civilian to have a will of steel to achieve this. So as you can see, when it came to weapons, it was a very mixed bag. To add insult to injury, it wasn't just weapons the Volkssturm was short on. There wasn't even enough uniforms for the Volkssturm, which was a big deal, as any combat unit, be it professional soldiers or militia, under the Geneva Convention, needed to have identifiable uniforms to be under its protection. So many Volkssturm units refused to fight without some kind of matching identifiable uniform, or part of one, with many simply having a matching armband and attempting to get similar coloured clothes of a similar design. And many Volkssturm actually chose to fight in the civilian clothes, so when the battles began, they were able to slip through and pretend to be just average civilians, which is obviously a smart choice because it was a pretty dangerous thing to be sent into the Volkssturm, under-equipped and lacking uniforms. It wasn't really looking good from the start. The training for the Volkssturm was less than ideal, with training occurring on weeknights and 6 hours on Sundays, with training being provided mainly by the SS, their so-called brown shirts, which was not great as these were basically Nazi Party domestic strongmen enforcers. These were not combat veterans, with many of the older Volkssturm members probably having more combat experience than their trainers. Also, with a lack of weapons and ammo, shooting training was pretty limited, especially on the more rare weapons and equipment, meaning most of the training would have been simple being told what to do and not actually doing it. There was an emphasis on drill and rifle shooting, but there was no emphasis on actual cohesion, like attacking tactics, defensive. It was very basic, very subpar. Even conscripts at the height of the Eastern Front fighting would have received better training than what the Volkssturm got. So it didn't look great for the People's Army. Lack of able-bodied men, lack of weapons, equipment, uniforms, and training. It was a recipe for disaster. But could their fighting spirit prevail? Now the Volkssturm served in both the Eastern and Western fronts, with far more being deployed to the east, as the Soviet juggernaut was hammering its way towards Berlin. So in the east, the Volkssturm's main contribution was to be a reaction force to stop armoured breakthroughs. As standard army units counterattacked, the Volkssturm were to stop the Russian armour making a major breakthrough, the German lines. This was done with all settlements having an early warning system, so if an attack happened, the local Volkssturm unit would muster and then begin to barricade roads and build defences to the best of their abilities. Then once the Russian tanks arrived, which they normally did in advance, quick, mobile, very good at punching into territory, they would try to neutralise them if possible. Now this may seem crazy, but as the Volkssturm only real weapon of effectiveness was the Panzerfaust, which they had an ample amount, they were better being sent to take out Russian tanks than the infantry, as they lacked sufficient small arms and sporting weapons to deal with mass combined forces. They also took part in major battles as supporting infantry forces, such as Königsberg. The problem was, even if there was good synergy with the regular army forces, the Volkssturm lacked the weapons and training to effectively fight. At best they could do defensive tactics, but when attacking or counter-attacking, it was a losing fight always. And this shows in the casualty rates in the east, with around 70% to 80% casualty rates for the Volkssturm units that saw combat, and many being completely surrounded and destroyed. Though it's said they did delay the Red Army with their lives spent, as they saw it that every day they held the Reds back, more of their friends and family members could surrender to the Allies in the West. This most likely gave the fighting spirit to die slowly enough to be an obstacle to the Red Army, but no way near enough to stop the Red Army completely. Nazi High Command had hoped they could do this, but they fell short. In the West, far less Volkssturm served, with their forces being mainly used in the defence of cities and to man the West Wall fortifications, supporting regular army units. But due to the fact surrendering to the Western Allies was seen as the only chance of surviving the war, desertions were high, and many units deserted as soon as they got a chance. And who could blame them? But as the Allies approached deep into Germany, Volkssturm units still fought, and when the final battle in Berlin began, it was the Volkssturm units who made up the bulk of the defensive forces, with some 60,000 Volkssturm soldiers fighting. With the remnants of SS and German military units supporting with them against 2.5 million Soviet troops, it was a losing battle from the start. But here the Volkssturm on many occasions fought to the death to delay the Soviets, and it went pretty well for them actually, causing a lot of casualties, especially destroying tanks, thanks to the close quarters urban environments, giving them ample opportunity to use their Panzerfaust up close. But eventually Berlin fell, and the last battle of the Volkssturm was over. In my opinion, the Volkssturm could have had an effect on the war, but they were used ineffectively. The fact that they raised 6 million men, but only were able to effectively arm about a third, meant that they were not ever going to be an effective fighting force. What they should have done is had them building purely defences, blockades, barricades, stuff to help the regular army dig in and slow down the Red Army advance. Now, the Germans did put around 400,000 able bodied people on construction duties, but I do believe these men would have been best used there. And trying to use them defensively was partially effective in some cases, but offensively, it was pretty much never effective. It was just a waste of lives. And in the end, the Volkssturm was a complete failure. It didn't stop the Allied advance, even though they fought hard. And in some rare cases, they did win, but very rare. They were mainly just cannon fodder, sent into battle, under-equipped, under-trained. And by the war's end, it's estimated 600,000 plus Volkssturm were killed, with them making up half of all of Germany's casualties in the last 4 months of the war. And over 1 million Volkssturm were captured. It was a fool's endeavour from the start. And as always, the average man paid for the people at the top's bright ideas. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I did the video on the Volkssturm, I think, a year or two ago. I thought I'd make a newer one, a bit more detailed, a bit better presented. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.